The hull groaned under my boots before I even saw the blood. I had 30 seconds of air left in my suit reserve, and a dead ship falling apart around me. And still I stopped walking, because something moved behind a shattered console. My name is Daniel Ashcroft, and on that day, I was not a soldier. I was a salvager, sent into a broken alien cruiser to strip it for parts, before it burned up in the atmosphere below. Nobody told me there would be anything alive inside. The cruiser belonged to the Varel, a species we had been fighting for almost 3 years. They were tall, silver-furred, with eyes like burning coals, and every briefing I had ever sat through told me the same thing. The Varel do not surrender. The Varel do not show mercy. The Varel see humans as animals wearing armor, nothing more. So when I heard the small sound behind the console, my hand went straight to my sidearm. I raised my light instead of my weapon, because something in that sound was wrong. It was not a growl. It was not a threat. It was small and broken, like a whimper trying to stay quiet. I found it curled behind a burned power cell, no bigger than a child, its silver fur matted with dust and dried blood that was not its own. Its eyes locked onto mine, wide and shaking, and I realized in that instant that I was looking at a cub, an orphan. The last living thing on a ship full of the dead. It flinched hard when my light hit its face, pressing itself into the corner like it was trying to disappear into the metal. I lowered my weapon slowly and knelt down, keeping my movements small. On the comm channel, I could hear my crew chief, a sharp-voiced woman named Grace Fenwick, calling for my status. I did not answer right away. I could not stop looking at the cub's eyes. It said something then, so quiet I almost missed it under the hiss of my helmet filters. The translator in my collar caught it half a second later and turned it into words I understood. "Will you finish it quickly?" That was the whisper. 6 words, spoken by a starving child who expected nothing else from a human except an ending. Something cracked open in my chest right then, something I did not have a name for yet. I had heard 100 briefings about Varel cruelty, about their discipline, about how they trained their young to hate us, before they could even walk straight. Nobody had ever mentioned that they trained their young to expect death from us too. Not mercy, not rescue, just a quick end. I reached out one hand, slow enough that the cub could pull away if it wanted to. It did not pull away. It stared at my glove like it had never seen a hand offered instead of a weapon. I said the only thing that made sense in that moment, and I meant every word of it. "You are not alone anymore. I have got you." The cub did not understand my language, only the translated version through its own small earpiece, torn and half-broken like everything else on that ship. But it understood the tone. Something in its shoulders loosened, just slightly, like a rope going a little less tight. Grace's voice came through again, sharper this time, asking why I had gone quiet. I told her what I found. There was a long pause on the other end, long enough that I knew this was not going to be simple. Command wanted the cruiser stripped and abandoned within the hour, because Varel reinforcements were tracking our position, and nobody wanted a fight over scrap metal. A live Varel cub changed everything. Some voices on the channel wanted me to leave it behind, calling it protocol, calling it a liability, calling it dangerous once it grew older. Other voices, quieter ones, wanted it brought in for study, locked behind glass somewhere far from sunlight. I did not like either option, and for the first time since joining that crew, I said so out loud. I carried the cub back to our shuttle myself, wrapped in an emergency thermal blanket, its small claws gripping the fabric of my sleeve the entire way. It did not make a sound. It just watched me, like it was waiting for the moment I would change my mind. Grace met me at the loading ramp with her arms crossed and worry written across her face. She was not a cruel woman, but she was practical, and practical people do not like promises made in the heat of a rescue. "You cannot keep it, Daniel," she said. "It is not a stray. It is Varel. It will grow into something that could kill every person on this ship without blinking. I told her I was not asking permission to keep it as a pet. I was asking for time. Time to prove that not every ending has to be the one we were trained to expect. She did not agree right away. Nobody did. But she let me bring the cub aboard, and that was enough for one day. The days that followed were not easy, and I will not pretend they were. The cub, who I eventually learned was named Vesa through broken pieces of translated speech, did not trust food that was not offered by my own hand. It flinched at loud footsteps. It slept curled into the smallest corner of whatever room it was given, like open space itself felt dangerous. I spent my off hours sitting near it, not speaking much, just staying present. Slowly, the flinching became less. Slowly, it began to reach for food before I even offered it. Small steps that felt enormous at the time. Not everyone on the ship was patient with that process. An officer named Colonel Whitmore, a stern man, with little tolerance for anything that slowed down a mission, wanted the cub transferred to an intelligence unit, far from the front lines. He called it an asset. He called it leverage. He never once called it a child. I stood in front of his desk and refused the transfer order, knowing full well that refusal could end my career, or worse. I told him that a promise made to a frightened, starving cub on a dying ship was not something I was willing to hand over to men who saw it only as a bargaining chip. Whitmore was not used to being refused. He gave me 1 week to prove my judgment was sound, or the transfer would happen with or without my approval. That week became the hardest test of everything I believed about keeping a promise. On the 4th day, sensors picked up a Varel scout vessel approaching our position, moving fast and armed. Every alarm on the ship began to scream, and for a moment, I thought the promise I made was about to get everyone around me killed. Grace ordered defensive positions. Whitmore ordered weapons hot. I ran straight for the room where Vesa was kept, my heart pounding harder than it ever had in actual combat, because I understood in that instant that this was not an attack. It was a search party. They were not coming for us. They were coming for her. I reached Vesa's room just as the ship shook from a targeted signal lock outside, not weapons fire, but a communication burst aimed directly at our hull. The Varel scout was hailing us, and their voice came through cold and sharp, demanding the return of what they called their lost kin. Whitmore wanted to answer with force. I stood between him and the comm panel and asked for 30 seconds, nothing more. I carried Vesa to the viewport myself, and for the first time since I found her, she spoke on her own, without waiting for translation, without waiting for permission. She said one word toward the comm channel, small and clear. Safe. The Varel voice on the other end went silent for a long moment. Then it asked, through the translator, whether the human had harmed her. I answered before Vesa could, my voice steady, even though my hands were shaking at my sides. I told them the truth. I told them I had made her a promise the day I found her, and that promise was that she would never be alone again, and never be hurt again, not by them and not by us. There was another long silence, heavier than the first. Then the Varel commander said something that no briefing had ever prepared me for. She said that humans were known for breaking every rule of war except one, and that was the strange, foolish habit of never breaking a promise once it was spoken aloud, even when it cost them everything. The scout vessel did not fire. It did not force a boarding. Instead, it requested a meeting, unarmed, to discuss the terms of Vesa's safety and, eventually, terms far larger than one small life. That single exchange, born from a starving cub's whispered plea for a quick ending, became the first real conversation between our two sides that did not end in gunfire. It was not peace, not yet, not fully, but it was a crack in a wall that had stood for 3 years, and cracks like that do not close again once they appear. Whitmore never fully forgave me for defying his order, but even he could not argue with the results sitting in front of him. Grace stopped calling it foolish and started calling it brave. though she never let me forget how close it came to disaster. Vesa grew up aboard that ship for a while longer, no longer flinching at footsteps, no longer curling into corners. She learned to speak our language properly, and I learned enough of hers to understand her fully without a translator's delay. She never forgot the 6 words she whispered to me that day, and neither did I. Years later, long after the fighting between our people had quieted into something resembling trust, she would remind me of that moment whenever either of us needed reminding of what one promise could do. She used to say that the day I found her, she expected nothing but silence. Instead, she found someone who chose to answer a whispered plea for an ending, with a promise of a beginning. That promise, small as it seemed on a dying ship full of the dead, ended up changing far more than one frightened cub's life. It changed the shape of a war, one honest word at a time.